Do you know how to overcome your inner critic?
This is Love Smarter, the show for women who want extraordinary love and aren't afraid to learn for it. Here's your host, Laurie-Anne King.
Hey. In today's episode, we are going to be talking all about the inner critic. I'm going to teach you what the inner critic is, where it came from, and 4 steps to overcoming it. So let's dive right in. The inner critic is that little voice in your head, or maybe it's a big voice in your head. It's the voice in your head that is constantly criticizing yourself, people around you, situations, things that you do, things that happen, the world, etc. Another word for the inner critic in psychology is the superego. The superego is basically our parents incorporated into our head. But not just our parents. It's all the rules of the society we grew up in, of our culture, our schooling system, the pure norms, all of that incorporated and smushed into our heads. The role of the superego is to keep our ego in check. Now, another way to think about the ego is your personality or your identity, the part that you identify as being you. It can be difficult to distinguish the superego from the ego, which we're going to talk more about how to do in this podcast. But it's enough to just know there's a difference. There's you, your identity, and then there's this other part of you that is designed to keep you in check. Really, the superego, the inner critic, is there for your survival. Its job is to make sure that you don't do anything that would prevent you from surviving. But it's not exactly a perfect system. See, the superego knows that you can survive anything that you've survived in the past. So it will actually keep your environment very familiar if it's left unchecked. The superego is in a lot of ways an enemy of growth because it's designed to keep you safe, and it knows that where you already are is safe. Now, you might not like it, you might not find where you are where you want to stay, but your superego knows that you can survive it, so it's motivated to keep you stuck. The inner critic, or the superego, is very difficult to detect sometimes. Now, we've all been listening to our inner critic, or our superego, for so long that it can be really difficult to detect it. It's a little bit like that hum the radiator made when you first moved into the apartment and you thought maybe you would never be able to sleep, and now you don't even notice it. You've been listening to the sound for so long, you don't even notice that it's there anymore. You're so used to it. Now, there's nothing inherently bad or wrong with our inner critic. It just becomes a problem when it starts dominating our environment, when it starts to dominate our thought space. And for most people, the thoughts they listen to most often are the thoughts of the inner critic. And those are the thoughts that are keeping them stuck. So here are 4 steps to overcoming your inner critic. Number 1, get to know it. If you want to overcome the inner critic, you need to be really familiar with it. Like I said, it can be difficult to detect the inner critic. We've just been listening to it for so long. So it's time to get familiar with it. How does it sound? What kinds of things does it say to you? Is its voice loud or quiet? Is it harsh or subtle? What are some of your inner critic's strategies and tricks? Does it call you names? Is it highly judgmental? Is the voice a man's voice or a woman's voice? You can tell your inner critic's at play anytime it tries to take joy out of a situation, or anytime it's telling you not to go beyond your comfort zone. These are times you want to really listen and pay attention to what it's saying. Observe the inner critic in action. A great way to do this is actually journaling. Write down what that voice in your head is saying. That's a really good way to catch it in action. There's something about being able to read the words the inner critic says on a piece of paper outside of our mind that helps us realize how much baloney it's really saying. The second step to overcoming your inner critic is to personify it. One of the reasons we are susceptible to the inner critic is that we don't distinguish it as different from ourselves. Personifying the inner critic is one of the ways that we can start to disidentify from it. So we no longer believe that those voices are our own. Most of those are voices that we've inherited as we grew up. They aren't actually our true thoughts or our soul's true calling. So give your inner critic a name, and you might even want to draw it. It might sound silly, but personifying the inner critic really helps distance yourself from it. It takes some of the power the inner critic has away from it, because now the inner critic no longer has you. You just have an inner critic. Mine, if you're interested, her name is Rita, and she is not that pretty to look at. Naming and drawing your inner critic also makes it a little less significant. Makes it more lighthearted and playful. Like, it's not this big deal. It's not a part of you that you need to be ashamed about. Everyone has an inner critic, and yours is one that you're actually cultivating a relationship with, rather than just being dominated by it. Number 3, catch it in action. To really overcome the inner critic, you need to catch it while it's live. You need to catch it while it's in action. And when you do, distinguish that thought as being the thought of the inner critic. Okay, so you've caught yourself in action. You've distinguished that the thought is the thought of the inner critic. Now, how do you know if you should listen to it or not? Well, I ask myself just one question, because I know that the value the inner critic has is for my survival. So I ask myself, am I in immediate danger? If the answer is no, then I straight up ignore what the inner critic is saying. I just dismiss the thought as Rita's baloney. If you are in immediate danger, okay, listen up. It's trying to save your life and it's important. 99.9% of the thoughts that you catch from the inner critic are going to be thoughts that you are just better off ignoring. So I'll talk to myself. I mean, either in my mind or out loud, I'll say, okay, thanks for sharing, Rita, but I'm not going to listen right now. The 4th strategy for overcoming your inner critic is to just escape. The inner critic lives in the domain of thought. It lives up here in your thought bubble. So one thing you can do is escape the thought bubble. Shift your attention somewhere else. Either go do a different activity that requires a lot of your focus so you can't be bothered with the thoughts of the inner critic, or shift into your body. A really simple technique is to just change your breathing. Just take 3 deep breaths and put all of your attention on feeling the breath in your body. Escape the domain of thought and shift to an area where your inner critic doesn't have any power. Our inner critic can be very persistent, and if they come and interrupt your new thought or your new activity, just keep dismissing them over and over and over again. So to recap, our inner critic isn't bad. It has a very useful role for helping us to survive. But if you're interested in more than just surviving, if you're interested in thriving, then you'll need to learn how to get a handle on your inner critic. So the first thing is get really familiar with it. Learn how that puppy works. The second is to personify it. Create a personality for your inner critic to help you disidentify from it. Thirdly, catch it in action. When you catch the inner critic in action, ask yourself, am I in immediate danger? If not, dismiss what the inner critic has to say and get on with it. And finally, 4th is escape. Escape the thought domain where the inner critic has power. Go shift your attention into your body or into your breath and change your entire state. So where in your life is your inner critic holding you back? Where are you listening to that voice that says you can't, you shouldn't, you're not good enough? Where is your inner critic impacting your relationship, your partner, your romantic dreams? Discover those areas and then use these steps to overcome your inner critic and create the life and the love that you want. All right, that's all for today. I'll catch you next time. And until then, love smarter. Hey, did you like this episode? Then you will love my upcoming live online class. You'll leave with insights that improve your love life immediately. Plus, you'll have the chance to ask me anything. This class is completely free and it always fills up quickly, so head on over to laking.tv/free class to register right now. See you in class.